All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think maybe we can take a deep breath after that very disturbing film. So I'll give a little brief about Dr. Mohammad Subeh, and then we'll go into some questions. I have a few prepared questions, and then I'll open it up to all of you to ask as many questions as you want. He does not have a time limit. I don't know if the room has a time limit, but we're good. So Dr. Subeh is an emergency physician and traumatologist with over a decade of humanitarian work delivering critical, time-sensitive healthcare in low-resource environments. Recently, he served on multiple 4-week medical missions to Gaza during the Gaza genocide that's ongoing. Working with the International Medical Corps, he helped establish field hospitals in Rafah, and I will ask him to define what field hospital is, in Rafah and Deir al-Baleh. While there, Dr. Subeh treated thousands of patients and witnessed the systematic decimation of the population and infrastructure, and the unprecedented obstruction of humanitarian work and aid delivery on the ground. Dr. Subeh received his BS in human biology, his master's in sociology, an MS in epidemiology from Stanford University. He received his medical doctorate from Oregon Health and Science University, completed residency in emergency medicine and trauma at the University of Chicago, and ultrasound fellowship at the University of California in Irvine. Dr. Subeh's research has been published in over 15 peer-reviewed medical journals and 2 textbooks. He has lectured on topics ranging from use of point-of-care ultrasound technology in managing life-threatening injuries to long-term epidemiological impacts of natural and man-made disasters on at-risk populations. He advises multiple health tech companies in the Silicon Valley. He currently practices emergency medicine in the San Francisco Bay Area. In his free time, he runs Ken's Coffee Roasters. He goes fishing and spends quality time with his wife and 2 sons. So help me welcome Dr. Subeh.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've watched this film at least 4 times, and every time I'm disturbed by it. Beyond belief. And this film was released in July of 2025. So the numbers, the statistics numbers that are in there are already, they're already wrong. And a month ago, because the situation on the ground is so bad, Doctors Without Borders announced that it had stopped its operation in Gaza City due to the destruction of the city and the targeted attacks on hospitals in Gaza by the IDF. So not only are on the ground the situation is bad, but also bad for those who are trying their hardest to provide humanitarian assistance. And as Pastor Jane mentioned, the BBC initially produced the film, but they never aired it. And I think this is another way of silencing the Palestinian voice and the Palestinian experience. So Dr. Subeh, my first question is, what was your reaction when you first saw this film? And is it depicting what you saw on the ground during your medical missions? Or are we only seeing a small snippet of what's really happening?
Yeah. So to start off, I want to thank everybody for making time to come together and get a glimpse into what's happening to our fellow human beings on the other side of this earth. Mm-hmm. And it's very important that we do that because ultimately we're all connected. And I think our society, and especially this day and age, we're fed a certain way of life that keeps us divided, and we fail to see our common denominator. Sometimes to know our common denominator, you have to feel the pain and appreciate the struggles of our fellow human beings. Yeah. So that's very important. This documentary, I think this is my third or fourth time I've watched it, and it's a fraction of what you actually see on the ground. And you imagine the anguish you feel just having spent an hour watching this, and then kind of translate that to a population of 2.5 million people who have been experiencing that now day in and day out for at least 2+ years, and in some ways over at least 80 years in the form of occupation and the past illegal siege in the past 2 decades on Gaza. A few things that I get from this documentary. So number one, there isn't a lot of talk about the restrictions on humanitarian organizations. And that's a real thing. Like, I was able to get in twice. I was denied entry twice. I was detained the last time for a day. And we have clear international humanitarian laws that put forth that you can't restrict humanitarian aid from coming in, can be a condition to a ceasefire, right? That's like a non-negotiable, right? Humanitarians entering, helping, we have humanitarian principles, one of which is being, neutrality. We're going to treat everybody regardless, right? Similar to when folks come to my ER here, I'm going to treat you regardless of who you are, where you come from, what you look like, what language you speak. And yet that hypocrisy in the application of international law and humanitarian law is not seen here in this documentary. The other thing is I think that's important to bear in mind. I mentioned the word occupation. We really don't grasp what it means to be living under occupation. So I imagine you're in, this is Lafayette. Imagine Lafayette is closed off, border. You were born here. You can't ever exit. You can't go to Oakland. You can never see Oakland. If you had an airport in Lafayette, be bombed out, you can't fly out of Lafayette. And if you had access to a water resource, you couldn't go out and go fishing. Otherwise, you'll be killed. That's life under the illegal siege of Gaza. Occupation in the form of the apartheid system in the West Bank, right? Can you imagine what that does to you as a human being, caged up like that? So that's not really mentioned. And the reason I kind of delve into that a little bit, is because oftentimes, especially in our Western media, it paints two opposing parties that have equal power.
Yeah.
But the power dynamic is so far off. It's an occupier and an occupied people.
Yes.
And we also know we don't advocate for any violence or anything to harm fellow human beings. That's the kind of who really we are as human beings. We also know international law speaks to this, right? If you want to look at, what is the role of armed resistance that occupied people have? There's that reality, and people are afraid to talk about that, even though it's etched in our international law. When we use the terminology prisoner versus hostage, it paints a certain image in your mind as to how I view a prisoner. Oh, maybe they committed a crime, even if they're a 10-year-old boy,
Yeah.
right? And that's the terminology used when it describes Palestinian hostages, 10,000 plus being held illegally without charge, extensions every 6 months of their illegal detention. Whereas if you're an Israeli, you're a hostage.
Yeah.
Palestinians die, Israelis are killed, right? Just understand how language matters at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Ceasefire, we've been hearing that the past few weeks. It's not a ceasefire, it's a one-way ceasefire.
Yeah.
Because over the past 2 weeks, Israel has killed over 200 Palestinians in Gaza. Just yesterday, 20 Palestinians killed in Gaza City. So it's a one-way ceasefire.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to have these spaces, because in these spaces we should pause and understand, where do we get our information from? How do we process that information? How do we critically think about the information that's presented to us? And where is it coming from? I think the BBC decided not to proceed in publishing this, mainly because it goes against the decades-old narrative that's been fed to us, which is, these Palestinians, these They don't even say Palestinian, actually. It's a means of erasing us. These Arabs just want to kill all Jews. And people will tell you that is absolutely not the case. If you actually go there on the ground, that is not the case at all. It's an issue of a colonizer colonizing a people. Yeah. It's similar to Manifest Destiny here in the United States and the genociding of Native Americans. Yeah. Very similar. Yes. And so they don't want the masses to wake up to that reality. On top of that, why is it important for us as Americans? Who here doesn't pay taxes? Your tax dollars are paying for those bombs, are paying for the drones that were buzzing above my head in Gaza 24/7. You never know, are they going to drop the bomb on me? That's your hard-earned dollars. And you have to have a say about that because we are directly linked to this. So yeah, I know those are a lot of different thoughts about that question, but I think it's all, comes all at once, kind of as one package.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, definitely, you're only seeing a glimpse, and we're only allowed to see a glimpse because they don't want the narrative to actually come out, the truth to come out. So over the last 2 years, I know the number in the film was 1,500 healthcare workers. I think the number now is 1,700 healthcare workers that have been either killed, kidnapped, tortured. What do those numbers mean? Who's specifically being targeted? Because I know my understanding is that they're also targeting the specialists that are the most experienced surgeons and hospital workers.
Yeah, so let's kind of rewind. Under the illegal siege for the past 2 decades on Gaza, it was extremely, extremely difficult to get healthcare in Gaza to begin with. And yet people, local healthcare workers were trying to level up their knowledge. How many folks here know Palestinians on the ground in Gaza, their literacy rate, percentage literacy rate? What is it? 7%. Is 97%. What's our literacy rate here in the United States? 70%.
Really?
70% in the US, 97% in Gaza. And yet unemployment rate was high because of this illegal siege. Healthcare, if you had a child, if my kid had cancer, where would they get their care? They'd have to apply to get care in an Israeli hospital. And if I was under the age of 55, I can't accompany them outside of Gaza. So I have to find somebody above the age of 55 who can take my kid to get cancer treatment. That is life under siege. So the healthcare system was already very, very difficult to function, right? You had some subspecialists and a handful of them, and they were trying to train up. So Shifa Hospital was one of the quote-unquote academic centers, medical centers, and Nasser Hospital in the south, which they showed you both, was the other one. And from day one, you already saw a deliberate targeting of those healthcare facilities under the guise of some tunnel infrastructure under each one. I don't know if you remember the Baptist Hospital, when it was one of the first hospitals that was bombed in Gaza. Almost 500 civilians that were seeking refuge there in the courtyard were killed. And at that time, it was like, Israel would never bomb a hospital, right? But after it became apparent that they were targeting the hospitals, well, they had to find a new reason. These made up terrorist infrastructures. Numbers are very important. So when you kill off, they mentioned this in the documentary, when you kill off the healthcare workers, even if you rebuild a hospital or 10 hospitals or 100 hospitals, you have nobody there. You have kind of a brain drain in some ways. And so you're basically eliminating the access to basic services. I worked actually at a hospital that then President Biden called the American Hospital on the ground. Our field hospital was funded primarily by the US government. And even with that, I had very limited access to medicines. I mean, you're talking about Tylenol, ibuprofen. If somebody needs an IV, you go and say you get a blood draw, right? You go there, they clean your arm with an alcohol swab. I didn't have rubbing alcohol for 2 weeks. And so imagine the risk for infection. We didn't have ventilators. I had one medicine called ketamine, which dissociates your mind from your body. And that was the only thing I had to do major surgeries, resect intestines, open chests, take bullets out of brains. Inhumane. I'd lose my job if I did that here in the US. I'd probably be put in jail, appropriately so. But the alternative in Gaza was you leave somebody to die. And I can tell you that all those medicines were 3 miles out on the other side of the border, just being held without reason. Yeah. Numbers. So a lot of people would ask me, like when I came back, is it real that 50,000, 60,000 number? It is multitudes more than that. That number that you hear from the Gaza Ministry of Health is the patients who are brought to a hospital, identified by a family or friend, and then buried. Now imagine if you are in North Gaza and the area is besieged by tanks. A missile drops on your building, kills 10 of your family members. Are you going to take every single one of those bodies when you pull them out after a week to a hospital that's being targeted so they can be registered and counted as a casualty? No, you're not. You're going to bury your mom, your dad, your kid, and move on. The real number actually came out, I think, from one of the research articles. I think it was in the Lancet recently. It's closer to 400,000. And interestingly, about 6 months ago, President Trump, when he was talking about ethnically cleansing Gaza, creating, Gaza, Riviera, said there's only like 1.7 million Palestinians there, right? We can find a different home for them. And if you just look at the numbers, October 2023, about 2.5 million. And actually that's an undercount because it was a year they were going to do a new census. So you're talking about 700,000 gone. And if you just say 150,000 left, maybe, were privileged enough to maybe pay the $5,000 to $30,000 per person to exit when Rafah was open, that's hundreds of thousands killed. That doesn't also account for people dying from strokes, heart attacks, cancer, kidney failure. You blow up the dialysis center. I took a GoPro in my second mission, and I just went into Nasser. I mean, the whole dialysis building is completely blown up. Medical records torched. Equipment. They'd go in, break all of the equipment that's there. That's equipment that they need, and it wasn't brand new equipment. It's like decades old, but they couldn't get any equipment in. So these numbers are a gross underestimate of what's happening on the ground. Healthcare workers, I think as of this past week, 1,795 have been killed. 1,795. That's a lot. That is a lot. You imagine if one of our hospitals here, imagine even 10 healthcare workers killed. That would be nationwide news, global news, right? But for some reason, if you're outside of our borders, if you look different, you speak different, you're not human enough to warrant our attention.
Yeah, I think the dehumanization of Palestinians here in the U.S. Contributes a lot to the atrocities that are happening. Dr. Subeh, a couple of months ago, Israel used what is known as a double tap. And you mentioned the Al Nasser hospital, but a couple of months ago, they did a double tap. Can you explain what that is and how barbaric it is? I mean, it's barbaric.
Yeah, double tap was something very familiar to us in Gaza. So double tap is basically what they might do is say, hey, get out of this building, we're about to bomb it. You got 60 seconds, right? You are leaving, they'll bomb it. Then shortly after, what happens? Ambulance crews are going to try to, save people. So they wait till they arrive, then they hit it again. And, it got to the point where actually, when we would have these missile strikes nearby, initially I was expecting, like, God forbid there's a mass casualty incident in my ER here. the protocol would be, as we were prepping for the surge of patients, dispatch would call us and say, I got 5 ambulances coming with gunshot wound to the chest and so on, right? In Gaza, because the ambulances were targets, and not just Gaza, by the way, because I spent a month in southern Lebanon last October when Lebanon was being bombed. Same essentially patterns we were seeing there, bombing ambulances. Because that was the case, what would end up happening is people would come in actually in mule-drawn carriages, so 20 bodies piled on top of each other. And you'd have to go through and sift through like who has any signs of life, who doesn't. It's illegal. Double taps are illegal. It was something, again, paramedics were constantly, there was not one ambulance that didn't either have bullet holes in it or blown up windshields. But it's illegal to target ambulances. It's illegal to target hospitals. There's one exception, and they mention it in the documentary. The one exception is, quote unquote, the enemy is attacking you from there. You got rockets coming out of a hospital, and you only attack in a proportionate manner, meaning you target back with the same. You don't blow up a whole hospital compound. You don't starve a population, collective punishment. Double tap is one of those things, but our world turns a blind eye to it. It's like, oh, okay, it's just war. I mean, you meet with Congress people, it's like, oh, that's just part of war. Just like play the game. Oh, somebody's cheating in a game. It's okay. Well, everybody cheats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I first saw the videos the day of the double tap of the Al Nasser hospital, the journalists and the medics, the hospital was bombed, and the journalists and medics went to see and report on it, and then 15 minutes later, those who were there to rescue and report on it were bombed. And so it's just like seeing it and witnessing it. And the only reason we have evidence of it is because the journalists had set up their cameras to respond and report on what happened. And the cameras actually captured the second strike. So you mentioned southern Lebanon. So I understand that you've completed 2 medical missions in Gaza, and then you also went to southern Lebanon after the deadly pager explosion. What has compelled you to volunteer your time and risk your life?
So I came here as a refugee in 1990, lived through 2 months of the Persian Gulf War. One of the things kind of fundamental values that my parents try to instill in me and my siblings was, 2 things. One is you can't be afraid of death. Mm-hmm. The only certainty is that we're all going to leave this earth one day. You don't know when, nobody knows when, no one knows how, but you will leave. So don't get caught up in the fear of that. And when you come to appreciate that, you come to appreciate all the time that you're given from the day you're born till the day you die. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is, there's a lot of moments of like hopelessness, helplessness as a child, kind of wondering. I remember like lying on this like little plot. I grew up in the eastern portion of Los Angeles, lots of gang violence and drugs, and it was really hard like to kind of find hope or optimism. And I remember like just lying down and just looking at the sky, like, why the heck am I here? Like, what am I supposed to be doing here? And my parents always reminded us, we don't care what you do with your life, but make sure you appreciate that God has given each of you gifts. And your role is to discover those gifts, build them up, and use them to benefit the world around you. So when we're talking about risk my life, not really risking my life. I've been privileged to be able to practice medicine. That's a privilege. To be able to take care of people, that's a big privilege. And then we don't use our privileges just when it's comfortable for us, right? We're very comfortable, I think, in the US. Super comfortable to the point where it risks us becoming complacent. And so in some ways, I'm also privileged to go on these medical missions because whenever I go, I am reminded of what like humanity should be like.
Yeah.
Like one of the beautiful things I saw in Gaza was like something we don't often get here, which is that element, that sense of community, people taking care of each other. You know, I get an orphan now. How do I break to that orphan that your parents are killed, you know, your siblings are killed, and I'm not doing it alone. The whole community's there. Everybody's taking care of everyone. Now, once did I see somebody eating alone, even with all the like lack of access to food, because it was outside on the 8 trucks 3 miles out. People, if they had a bowl of rice, be like 4 or 5 people eating from it, and they say to me, "Tfaddal, come on, come join us, have some food," right? And it was kind of like a 180 from like what I had experienced here in the COVID pandemic, where people were hoarding things, and it's like, you don't need 500 tissue rolls, like what? Like that's bizarre, right? So it was beautiful. Actually, if I could just mention one of my first experiences on the ground in Gaza was within the first hour I arrived, and I had come out of the vehicle that took me to the field hospital, and this older gentleman came up to me, had tattered clothing, and he looked at me with this big smile, and he handed me 2 cookies that he had small little biscuits, and he said, "I'm so happy you're here, we're so happy you're here, please take this." And I said, "No, Ammo, no, uncle, like, you just keep it, you know, I don't need cookies, consider accepted." And he said, "No, you have to take this." And so I felt embarrassed to not take it from him. So I said, "Well, what are you going to have today? What are you going to eat?" And he said, "Don't worry about me. My sustenance comes from God." And that conviction of like, you know, not me, myself, and I that I'm used to, or like the frustration of why didn't my Amazon Prime package come at 4 a.m. Like, you know, it was a breath of fresh air of like, what does it mean to be a human? And so it's not really risking my life. It's I think by not going on these missions, I risk my humanity actually. So yeah, it's just a different mindset.
Yeah, and it grounds you.
I have several questions.
Okay.
First of all,
Why don't you grab this?
Yeah. You're a refugee from where?
Excellent question. I'm a Palestinian refugee, and what that means is in 1948, my grandparents were forcibly expelled from their homes from Jaffa and Elid, towns in Palestine, and settled in Kuwait. So about almost 1 million Palestinians were forced out of their homes, off their lands in 1948. So read up about the Nakba. It's called the catastrophe, Nakba. And a lot of people don't want you to know about it because this is the crux of why we're experiencing what we're experiencing today. Quote unquote conflict, that's what it is. So I was born in Kuwait, lived the first 6 years of my life there, and then during the Persian Gulf War, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, we had to flee after 2 months of living through that because my father was going to be killed. It happened to be that my mom had delivered my youngest sister in 1987 while visiting her brother here in Los Angeles. He was a college student, and my sister was born early. And so, God plans, right? So she was a US citizen, and the embassy actually initially called us and said, we're going to get you out. And we're like, no, we're not going to go to the US, like we live here, all my grandparents, my aunts, uncles. But then 2 months in, it was no longer feasible. So I'm a refugee, Palestinian refugee with that backstory.
Next question.
Wait, before you go, I just want to say, we actually, his parents and my dad are from the same city, Lidda, that I mentioned in my intro. And you too, okay. And my father ended up in Libya, and I was born in Libya. So Dr. Subeh was born in Kuwait, I was born in Libya. There is millions of Palestinians living in diaspora across the world. I have family all over the world, and I'm sure Dr. Subeh does too, and every other Palestinian, because that's what happened in 1948. So it wasn't just forcibly displacing the Palestinians inside, but Palestinians were forced outside of the country, which is exactly what the Trump so-called peace plan and ceasefire plan is trying to do, is trying to force Palestinians and ethnically cleanse them from Gaza, from the West Bank, so that we are no longer attached to the land. I do want to mention, I'm sorry, this is taken away from, but I did do a DNA test of my father before he passed away. My father was born, as I mentioned at the intro, in 1920 in Lidda, and he passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 102.
Wow.
Beautiful life, uprooted several times because, you know, like Dr. Subeh, Kuwait became difficult, Libya became difficult, but our ancestry is 98.8% Palestinian from Palestine. So we are indigenous to the land. We are the true, indigenous population, and that's what scares, I think, the Israeli narrative.
Yeah.
So sorry.
No problem.
How are you able to go in and out if you are you American citizen then from
Yeah.
Kuwait or no?
I-
Local passport, how do you go in and out?
Yeah. It took 15 years to become a U.S. citizen. So anyone who tells you the immigration process is easy, it is extremely difficult. So we were refugees, then we got political asylum, finally got a green card in almost 2000, then 2005 became a U.S. citizen. And so I can travel now with my first and only passport as a U.S. citizen. If you were born, so if you're Palestinian, initially what I had was something called a travel document from the United Nations that said you are stateless. That's what it has your name and you're stateless. And it was kind of, it's funny in the immigration interviews, they're like, well, no, where are you from? From Palestine, but this is my passport. I'm stateless. That's the experience. And so, yeah, I travel as a U.S. citizen. I'm a U.S. citizen.
Where did you get your medical training?
Where did I get my medical training? A little bit of everywhere, but within the U.S. Stanford, Oregon, Chicago, Irvine. Yeah, a little bit of everywhere. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I guess we're opening it up to the audience.
I'd just like to ask you about Al Arab Hospital. Al Arab Hospital.
Mhm.
Do you know anything about Al Arab Hospital right now? Or Suhaila used to be the director of the hospital. She was an American Palestinian.
Are you talking about Al Ahli? Al Ahli in
Arab
Gaza?
Hospital.
So Al Ahli Hospital. So the thing about it is, I spent a little bit of time in a few hospitals in Gaza outside of my field hospital. Our movement was extremely restricted, and mainly because we were targets. If you left the hospital, and especially you didn't leave with scrubs on, you were going to be a target. So I don't know specifically any individuals, plus that's north. I spent my time initially in the south and then central Gaza, but I don't know specifically there, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll do that.
As the ethical oath that physicians take, I find it just incredulous that the Israeli physicians would have, as depicted on the film, just almost the mentality of the torture and so forth carried on by the soldiers at different times.
Mhm.
And was that a rarity, or that was reported to extensively?
So I was privileged to be able to meet with some of the doctors who had just been released during one of my missions there. One of them was, you saw him in the beginning, Dr. Abu Salmiya, who was the director of Shifa Hospital. And one of the beautiful things about him is 3 days after being released, after being tortured, he was sitting next to me on a table, and we were conducting advancement exams for ER residents. And it showed his love for his profession and his calling. So I would say, so your question is really good in that it paints like, you take an oath, how can you allow that to happen? And it's really the psychology of kind of the herd mentality. A lot of people are afraid to step up and say like, hey, no, this is wrong. I mean, the doctor there mentioned he was afraid of being labeled a traitor, right?
Yeah.
But you take an oath to take care of people regardless. Like some people ask me like, would you take care of an Israeli soldier? I take an oath to take care of every human being.
Yep.
Every human being, That's what we take an oath. Does that mean I don't tell you you're doing something wrong? No, it doesn't. We're human. I'm going to tell you. If somebody's doing something harmful, if a patient comes into my ER and is doing something really harmful to their body, I'm going to let them know. I'm going to take care of them, care about them as a human being. I'm going to tell them you're doing something wrong, right? So you can still do both. You don't have to look over there. I mean, you look at our professional societies here. How hard it is for me to even have my emergency medicine professional society have a statement about the importance of protecting healthcare workers. That, for some reason, has now become political.
Yeah.
And people are afraid to, like, this stigma with, quote unquote, politics. But politics intersects with every part of our life.
Yes.
Like, politics has to do with a kid who's coming with malnutrition to my ER, right? Or who can't get access to a good education, who's living out of an RV in the most affluent community on the face of earth. That's politics. And as a doctor, my job is also to advocate for my patients. And so a lot of it is that, but I think it distills to the herd mentality and just feeling like unless one person steps up and then the second and then the third, you won't have that ripple effect that causes this kind of wave of change. I was oftentimes, I can't tell you how many times I got kids who were sniped either by drones that were operated remotely or by snipers. Like one time I got a 3-month-old who was sniped. And I would pause and think, like, on the other side of that trigger is a human being who was born to this earth as a baby. How did they get to the point where now they can pull the trigger on a baby, right? And it's really decades and environment of dehumanization. You just see that person as subhuman. We're all at risk of that, by the way. All at risk. If we're passing by an unhoused person who's sleeping on the street and we're like, oh, what a nuisance. Well, you could be that person. You know, God just gave you, the ability to sleep in a comfortable bed with a roof over your head, right? We care about everybody. And here, I mean, Christian faith, we care about our fellow human beings, right? Because we all come from the same place, right? And we're all answerable to God. And so I think we need more of that kind of mindset to change the world.
How do we, as Americans, deal with this to make a difference?
I think, so number one, what can we do? Number one thing is raising awareness locally. Your friends. If you're going out for a coffee, tea, brunch, a get-together, you have to be talking about it. A lot of people will say, what about Hamas? Well, what if my government here makes poor decisions? Does that mean all 350 million of us should be killed? No, that's ridiculous. Hence why we have international law, right? Have people start thinking about, like, apply it to yourself, right? Okay, when did Hamas, when was the inception of Hamas? 1987. 1987. So how come they killed all those Palestinians before 1987, right? So I think, like, the narrative wants to anchor blame on particular groups, because if Hamas doesn't exist today, tomorrow there's going to be another boogeyman within Palestine, just to justify the continued ethnic cleansing. I think what the best thing you could do is relay to friends, family, community, that power dynamic we were talking about. That it's not two equal parties. It's not Arabs hate Jews, Jews hate Arabs for 3,000 years. No. First of all, the Jews that existed there 3,000 years ago were Arab Jews. My grandma would tell us stories. Palestinian Jews that lived with the Palestinian Christians and Muslims and atheists in Palestine.
In harmony.
The narrative wants you to believe that this is an age-old conflict. Conflict is the word they love to use, and it's not a conflict.
That's what they said.
And so Language matters. Now what do? If you're not on the phone with your congressperson, well, number one, if you don't know who your congressperson is, find out. You need to call them and tell them why it's so important to you, and that you're going to be seeing how they're voting on things, proposing bills. Some of them will say, well, my bills aren't even going to make it to the floor. Well, I don't care. You still have to do your part. Put out a bill, right? And hold them accountable. And believe me, they're watching. I guarantee you. I was not very politically active prior to all this, but I realize how important it is, because there are political action committees in our country who control our elections, who control, I can tell you for a fact, that they will meet with Congress people and say, if you don't vote on these things this way, we're going to unseat you in the next election. Spend 20, 30 million, they're unseated. And these politicians just want to keep their seat, right? Because they also care about other issues that are relevant. And so their thing is like, well, let's not rock that boat. But it's all interconnected. Because if we're spending 40 billion on sending arms, well, that 40 billion we could be spending on access to good healthcare, education, food, a whole bunch of things, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't necessarily need Prop 50 and Measure A if we weren't sending our money there. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you asked specifically the question that I have an action for you. So last week, there's a coalition that launched this Voters Against Billions to Israel. I have handouts in the front. This is for American voters who will take the pledge that they will only vote for candidates who oppose sending our tax money to Israel. And what we're trying to do is build a database so that we can leverage and influence our congressional representatives. If we have 10,000 signatures and pledges from Representative Sam Liccardo's office, or here it's Desailliers. Yeah, he has not been great at voting, right? So if we have 10,000 signatures in Representative Desailliers' congressional district, then we can actually leverage and influence more on, just influence him basically. Yeah. So there's handouts in the front. In addition to that, I brought handouts of this. This is just a quick infographic. They're available out front, but this also is a good tool for you to use when you're talking and you're discussing at your brunch or at your tea. What actually happened in Gaza over the last 2 years? This is a quick summary. So these are resources out there.
Just a quick also, one of the co-sponsors of this event is Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center, and they are a local Peace and Justice Center located in Lafayette. And actually Mark Lee is over here. Mark Lee, if you could raise your hand. She runs Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center, and they are an amazing resource in terms of how to get more involved. So please do talk to her and join their mailing list and get involved that way.
Yeah. So I guess we're closing out. So thank you, Dr. Subeh, for your time.
Of course, yeah.